Today's daf is Chulin daf Kuf Yud Aleph, and we are in the middle of the Amid, 11 lines from the bottom of daf Kuf Yud Amid Beis. So, in the preparation of kosher meat, as we've seen and will continue to see, not all of the kosher animal is kosher. So you have a kosher animal, you did a kosher shchita, it's not a treifa, it's still not 100% kosher. There's still things that you have to do. Number one, you have to remove certain chalavim. There are 4 chalavim that the Torah mentions in Kachim had to go on the Mizbeach. In Chulin, at the very least, need to be removed. If somebody eats chaylev, he's chayiv kares. So it's really, really chomer to remove the chaylev. Ironically, the chaylev of a kosher animal is more chomer than eating a non-kosher animal. If you eat from a non-kosher animal, it's malchus. If somebody eats the chaylev of a kosher animal, it's chayve krisis. So just because the animal's kosher doesn't mean you can sit down now and start eating all parts of the animal. You have to remove the chaylev, the gitanasha. That's another thing that you have to remove. Another thing that needs to be removed from even a kosher animal is the blood. The Torah says you're not allowed to eat the dam of an animal, and as a result, you have to make sure that the blood is removed. Now, chaylev and the gid hanasha are removed by doing what's called nikor. They're surgically removed by a mumcha, a specialist, someone that knows how to do it. In the Ashkenazish kehilas and in most Sfardish kehilas, the minig is not to do nikor at all, and it's for that reason we spoke about this. The hindquarters of the animal, which is where most of the tricky chaylev is, and which is where the gid hanasha is just sold off to the non-Jews that eat nevelis and treifas, and like this, we don't deal with it. Simply for practical purposes. As it relates to the dams, you can't remove the dam through nikor. You can't surgically take out all the dam of the animal. So how do you remove the dam? So we do what's called melicha. We salt it. It's what's known as kashering. We kasher the animal. Kashering the animal means that you're removing the dam of the animal. There's one part of the animal that's very, very difficult to kasher, and that is the liver. And the reason the liver is so difficult is because the liver is saturated with blood. And because the liver is saturated with blood, the primary function of the liver is to filter the body's blood. So there's so much blood running through it, and there's so much blood in the liver, that by merely kashering it, it would be impossible to remove all of the dam. And it's for that reason that the liver has a special place in halacha. So why does the liver have its own sugya? Chulin, Kuf Yud Amid Beis, Kuf Yud Aleph Amid Aleph. It's because of this physical mitzios, this phenomenon, and that is that the liver is saturated with blood. The blood, even of a kosher animal, is non-kosher. Ordinarily, we would kasher the animal by salting it, or by cooking it, or broiling it, roasting it, by removing the dam in some way, shape, or form. But that's an impossibility when it comes to the liver. As a result, as we'll see now, the Chachamim discussed Tanoim and Amayuraim and different minhagim, how exactly you make liver kosher. Now that's clear that liver's kosher. There's nothing to debate. The shaila is how exactly you go about and kasher the liver. That's the first thing that we need to know before we start today's daf. The second thing is that even though it's true that blood of an animal is not kosher, and for that reason you have to kasher an animal, but there's a very interesting chiddush, and not everybody realizes, and that is that if somebody eats raw meat, it's okay to eat it without kashering it first. Meaning the blood that is inside an animal, that never left the animal, is actually okay. And it's something that's mutter to eat. So in theory, if you would eat raw meat without kashering the meat, you wouldn't be over for sure the issa dairaisa of achilas dam. When does dam become aser midairaisa? It's when the dam of the animal departs from the meat. It's for that reason you can't cook meat without kashering it. Because when you cook meat, what happens? Now that we're learning the halachas of Issa the Heter, we're learning the halachas of Basa V'chalav, Taruvos. When you cook meat, so there's blias and there's plaitis. So some of what's inside the meat is going to go out, and then it's going to end up coming back in. So it's in the process of bishul. It's in the process of preparing the meat where you have to stop being concerned about the Issa dam. Because then you're worried about the dam going out and the dam coming back in. So anytime you're talking about Issa dam, for sure on the biblical level, what you're discussing is the dam of an animal that left the animal and then came back in. As it relates lemaisa, if you were going to eat raw meat, it would be okay. In theory, again, for sure on the deraisa level, because the meat never discharged its blood. As a result, the blood that's inside the meat in its natural state, is okay. And as a result, it won't be an issue. Where it becomes an issue, where you have to kasher the meat, is if you're going to go and you're going to prepare it with some sort of fire. It's going to be bishul, it's going to be tzli, it's going to be tigun. That's when you have to start worrying about kashering the meat. So for that reason, the liver would be no different. So if you're going to go ahead now and you're going to eat the liver, so to eat the liver raw is for sure not an issue. There's no reason the liver should l'chayra at first glance, although after further review with the Rishonim, it could be it's a little trickier, but pashtas, there's no reason the liver should be any different than any other part of the animal. Where the liver becomes a shayla is if you cook the liver again, just like any other part. So that's where you have issues, because you can't really kasher the liver. I mean that you can't really kasher the liver, so once you cook it, now the dam left, now you have the Yisur dam, that's where you would have to start worrying about it. Either way, says the Gemara, Amalei Abai the Rav Safra. Abai told Rav Safra, Kisalkus lahasam, Abai lived in Bavel, Rav Safra lived in Bavel, but Rav Safra was going up to Eretz Yisrael. So Abai told Rav Safra, when you go to Eretz Yisrael, Bo Minaya, I want you to ask the Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael, Kavda Ma'oten Bey. How exactly do you prepare liver? Meaning, how exactly do you treat liver? Says the Gemara, Kisalik, where Rav Safra came to Eretz Yisrael, Ashki Chil Rav Zriki, met Rav Zriki, Amalesi, he told him, Rav Zriki did, Anosh Alki Le Rav Ami. He says, you want to know what we do with liver? I says, listen, I cooked liver once, and I fed it to Rav Ami, who's the Gadol Adar V'achal, and he ate it. So you for sure can cook liver, and you can prepare it. It's not going to be an issue. Now, why would you think you can't cook liver? It's based on the introduction that we just spoke at. It's very simple, because once you cook meat, now you have to start being worried about the dam. That was the second thing we mentioned in the intro. Being that you can't really kasher liver, you can't salt it and just remove the liver. It poses a challenge. So as a result, maybe you can't cook it, because when you're going to cook the liver, the dam is going to go out, and then it's going to come back in, and as a result, you can have an issue. Ordinarily, what do you do when you want to cook meat? You kasher it. But with liver, we said you can't kasher it. So if you can't kasher it, it might be a little bit of an issue. Stating that, Rav Zrika told Rav Safra that I cooked liver and I fed it to Rav Ami. So if the great Rav Ami ate it, clearly it's not an issue. Says the Gemara, Rav Safra came back to Bavel. So he was all excited. He had a Meiser Rav with the great Rav Ami to tell Abaya that it's okay to cook liver. Abaya told him, he says, Rav Safra, you didn't understand my question. I knew it's okay to cook liver by itself. I never had a shaila whether you can or cannot do that. What was my shaila? My shaila was, could you cook liver with something else? So what's the pshat? So we need a little commentary over here. Zok Rashi, that Abaye never had a shaila that you can cook liver by itself. And the reason is, because what's the concern? The liver is going to be maflit dam, and then it's going to be boileya, that dam right back. So now the dam that's in the liver is not only the dam that it has naturally, but it's also the dam that had left the liver, and that it now reabsorbed, that dam already carries with it the Yisur dam. But Abaye said, with liver it's not a concern. Because being that liver has so much dam in it, it's so busy being maflit, Lashon Rashi, Aidi de Torid, lifloit, it doesn't have time, it doesn't have the ability to be baileya. So Abaye said that even though ordinarily when you cook foods together, there's two things there. It's a two-way road. It's being maflit, it's being baileya. It's being maflit, it's being baileya. But when liver is in the equation, liver is only being maflit, it's not being baileya. Why? Because there's just so much time to be maflit. It doesn't have the ability to even be baileya. So Abaye knew it's pashit that cooked liver is no different than raw liver. Why is raw liver okay? Because the dam that it has in it is the dam that it has naturally. That's not a problem. For that same reason, cooked liver is okay. Because the cooked liver, even though it's going to be maflit, and based on that, in theory, it should now be baileya, but the liver is always going to be maflit, it's never going to be baileya. The kivan, the truth that he lifted to lahoitzi kol shah, loy bala, says Rashi. So Abaye said that was never my question. You know what my question Abaye said was, are you allowed to cook liver with something else? Could you take liver and put it in pot with a corned beef, with something else? What's the shaila? The shaila is now the corned beef, is it baileya from the liver or not? So l'chayra, you'd say for sure it is, right? Because the liver is going to be maflit, even though the liver itself is not going to be baileya, but the other piece of meat is going to be baileya. So if the other piece of meat is going to be baileya, it should be okay. So what's the other tzad? So it's not so clear what the other tzad is, but Rashi and Daf Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, and the top Rashi at the end seems to explain it. He just says one line. Says Rashi that liver kivan de ikro dam, being that it's Ikra dam, it could be that dam the Torah never even said is asa. And that was Abaya's Shaila. So Abaya's Shaila was, and this is going to be the Shaila Lamaskon. His Shaila was that, do you say that liver is no different than any other piece of meat? And just like all meat, the dam is asa once it departs, so too the dam of the liver is going to be an issue as well. And for that reason, you shouldn't be able to cook liver with something else. Cook liver by itself is not a problem because it's never going to be Baileya its own dam. But to cook liver with something else should be a problem because the dam that leaves the liver is problematic and the meat that you're cooking the liver with is going to be Baileya. Or maybe liver for some reason is different. Why in the world should liver be different? The reason liver is different is because maybe liver, being that it's ikra dam, so it's for that reason that dam the Torah never even said is aser. So, on the one hand, you could look at liver as being a lot more chamer lahalacha, being that it's ikra dam, so wow, maybe you shouldn't even eat it. I mean, there's so much of the animal we don't eat. We throw out the whole back half of the animal. So it would sound like maybe, the liver will have to forego as well. But the Gemara actually has a tzad that maybe liver is even more kuladik. Because it's ikra dam, and we know for sure you're allowed to eat the liver, so based on that, maybe the Torah never aser dam when it comes to the liver. So it's hutter miklolo, so to speak, that maybe it's fine, right? What did Yalta tell Rav Nachman in the beginning of yesterday's dam? Asan lan dama, sharon la kavda. Right, that's one of the places where you find that Hashem was mater asura. Hashem said that you can't eat dam. Oh, but you could eat the liver. Well, what does the liver have to do with dam? Because it's ikra dam, and even though it's ikra dam, still it's okay. And Abaya had it said that maybe the dam of the liver is never a problem, so that if you cook it with something else, maybe that's going to be fine. And that was his shaila. Says the Gemara. But Rav Safra told Abaya, I don't understand Abaya. Why is it so plasha to you that if you cook the liver by itself, it's okay to eat it? Now Abaya, we just explained the svara. But Abaya, how do you know that for sure? Maybe that svara is not a real svara. How do you know this svara, that being that the liver is so busy being maflit its dam, it doesn't have the ability to be baileya? It's not. You probably know it from the following Mishnah. It's a Mishnah in the 10th parak of Masechtes Trumos. The Mishnah says, Eino neseres. It says, koved, that's the missing word. Eino neseres. If you cook liver by itself, it doesn't become asr. So you see, you can cook liver. But based on that, meaning Abaya, if you know that Mishnah, then you should know that it's pashit that you're not allowed to cook meat together with liver. Because what does the end of the Mishnah say? The Tanan, that's that same Mishnah, Kovid Oiseres ve'enin Eseres, meaning it says Oiseres. So the same Mishnah, Abaya, Rab Safra said, that says that HaKovid Enin Eseres, says HaKovid Oiseres, Neivshit Paletes ve'enin Beilas Amalei. So he told him, Duma Hasam Bekavda Disuras. Abaya said, you're right. Pashtus, the Mishnah Masechtas Trumos seems to be saying what you're saying, and that is that the liver is not Neseres if you cook it by itself, but it is Oiseres if you cook it together with something else. But there is another way to learn that Mishnah. Maybe that Mishnah is not talking about kosher liver. Maybe that Mishnah is discussing non-kosher liver, umishum shamnu nisa. And the issue over there is not the dam of the liver, but rather the issue in that Mishnah is the shuman. It's the meat itself of the liver. Meaning maybe that Mishnah was discussing if somebody cooked non-kosher liver together with kosher meat. Says the Mishnah, Kavid Oiseres. The liver is going to make it usher. Why? It's no different than any other piece of non-kosher meat that you cook together with kosher meat. With halacha is, unless there's a shir bittul, it's going to be a problem. Now the Mishnah also says that Akavid Enu Neseres, which would mean that if you cooked kosher liver with non-kosher meat, the liver would be kosher. What's the svara? It's the same svara that Abaya knew that is the reason that you can cook liver by itself. Because liver is never considered a baileya. It's always considered a maflet. It's so busy being maflet dam, it's never baileya its own dam. It's so busy being maflet dam, it wouldn't even be baileya from the piece of non-kosher meat that is being cooked together with. But the point is, as it relates to the line in the Mishnah, HaKavid Oiseres, so even though at first glance it sounds like if you cook liver together with kosher meat, the halacha is it's a problem. What's the problem? Because you can't kasher the liver, and the liver is going to be maflet dam into the kosher meat. But Abaye said, I don't know if that's true. Maybe the Mishnah Masechtas Trumos is discussing non-kosher liver, and the issue is not the dam. The issue is the shamnu nisa. It's the basa. The bottom line is vishum dama mai. What's going to be the halacha with regards to dam? So again, Abaya told Rav Safra, when you go to Eretz Yisrael, find out whether it's okay to cook liver. Rav Safra thought that what he meant to ask him was, is it okay to cook liver by itself? Why not? Because once you cook the liver, the dam goes out, then it's going to be balei. Why is it different than any other piece of meat? Any other piece of meat, you kasher it first. But with liver, you can't kasher it. So mean that you can't kasher it, so maybe you can never cook it. To eat it raw, that's fine. It's no different than eating any piece of meat raw, which is fine. The question is, cooking it. Once you cook it, the dam goes out. Once the dam goes out, now it's the Isser dam. chayve krisos, now you're going to be by it again. It's gonna be an issue. And that was what Rav Safra thought Abaya's shaila was. And he asked Rav Zrika told him, I once fed cooked liver to Rav Ami. I know for sure liver is kosher. Came back and he told Abaya said, Rav Safra, you didn't understand the question. I knew you're allowed to cook liver by itself. That's for sure okay. It's a Mishnah Masechtas Trumas. I know misvara, and the reason is because even though it's true when you cook the liver is going to be maflet dam, but it'll never be by leia the dam because it's so busy being maflet, it won't be by leia. My shaila is something else. Could you cook liver, kosher liver, with something else, with another piece of meat? What's the shaila? The shaila is the other piece of meat is going to be by leia from the dam of the liver. You have no way of kashering the liver, and the other piece of meat is going to be by leia from it. So if the other piece of meat is going to be by leia from it, so based on that, maybe you shouldn't be able to, maybe based on that, you shouldn't be able to. What's the other side? The other side is that being the liver is ikra dam. Maybe the Torah never answered the dam of the liver. At first glance, it seems to be a Mishnah, hakoved oiseres, but Abai said it's not a Mishnah. And that was Abaya's shaila. Says the Gemara, Rav Safra went to Eretz Yisrael a second time. Ki other Salik, when he went back again, Ashkel Rav Zrika, he met Rav Zrika again. So he went over to Rav Zrika and he said, Rav Zrika, remember that question I told you that Abaya told me to ask you? I misunderstood the question. The question was, can I cook liver with something else? So he asked him the shaila now properly. Amalei, he told him, Hainami loiti ba'ilach. He can tell Abaya that's not either a shaila. Da'ana, because myself, v'yanei breder Rav Ami, and not Rav Ami, but Rav Ami's son Yanai. Ikfun lebei Yehuda breder Rav Shimon ben Pazi. Well, once in the house of Yehuda, who was the son of Rav Shimon ben Pazi. So this is the Gedolei Amiram's son. You have Rav Ami's son, Rav Shimon ben Pazi's son. Ukrivan kanya b'kufya v'chalna. And they served kanya, which is the trachea of the earlier part of Masechtas Chulin fame. Bekufya, it was attached to all the organs that it's naturally attached to. Rashi says hareya, the lungs, the lev, the heart, the kavod, and the liver. They were all cooked together, v'chalna, and everybody sat down and ate. So he said, Amiram sat down and they ate liver, which was attached to there was a whole bunch of parts of the animal that were attached to each other, and they sat down. They ate the digestive tract of the animal. It was intact, but they ate it, tachlis. So you see, it's okay, even though the liver seemed to have been cooked with other foods. You see, it's okay to eat liver that's cooked with other foods. Must be the dam of the liver is different. But the Gemara says two reasons why maybe you can't be pushed Abaya's shaila from masculine of Rav Ashi v'teim Rav Shmuel bizrukinyo v'dom pikanu chutz l'kteira. And this is a little bit of a chiddush. Maybe what happened over there is that the liver was outside of the pot when the food was being cooked. And it's for that reason, the assumption is that even though the food was inside, the liver was inside, but the kana was outside. And even though the liver was inside the pot, and based on that, you would think that the liver should be maflet dam into everything else that's in the pot. But what we do is we make an assumption and we say that all the platus of the liver, such as the dam, that's what we're concerned with, instead of it being distributed into all the food that's inside the pot, it actually traveled up the kana, which was chutz l'kteira, and as a result, it never got involved in anything that's inside the kteira. So it's not muchach over there was a case of blias. In a regular case where all the food is submerged underwater inside a pot, so in that case, it would be a problem perhaps. But in your case, it's not muchach, so Rav Ashi said, and if the case was with the piyah, the kana was chutz l'kteira, over there, the blias or the platus of the dam would have never been distributed amongst the other foods. You have no raya that you're allowed to cook liver with something else. Inami, alternatively, there's another way out, and this is going to be very important, lahalacha, and that is michlat havachalat meikara. Maybe before the liver was cooked together with all these other foods, it could be it was boiled first. Maybe it was boiled, and if it's boiled, that would be a game changer in this whole discussion, as we're going to see soon. Says the Gemara, Rav Huna, like Rav Huna had the minhag, Rav Huna, before he would cook liver, he would first boil it in vinegar. Rav Nachman Rav Nachman would boil it in hot water. Parenthetically says the Gemara that if somebody would boil the vinegar, the liver with vinegar, the vinegar would be aser. Amalei. So Rava told Rav Papa, no, there's no way that the vinegar is going to be aser, because if the vinegar is going to be aser, then the liver has to be aser. Because just like the vinegar has in it the blios of the liver, because the liver is maflet into the vinegar, hadabala. You have to assume that afterwards, at some later point, being that the liver is submerged inside the vinegar when it's being boiled there, it would be baileya back from the vinegar, and the liver would vaiter biyasar. So if you're going to use boiling liver in vinegar to kasher on some level the liver, you have to say that the vinegar itself is going to be mutter. So what does this all mean? What does this mean? So we're saying that it could be really, it's not okay to cook liver together with food. Why? Because the dam of the liver is a problem, just like the dam of all parts of the animal is going to be a problem. This maisa shahaya kachaya. There what happened was it was boiled first in vinegar. It was boiled first in hot water. And says the Gemara, you find that the Amoyram, before they would cook liver, that's what they would always do. So what was the point in it? What was the point in boiling it? Says the Gemara that the point of boiling it was not, that's all the Gemara explains, that the vinegar or the boiling water should be baileya, all the dam that's inside the liver. Because if that's the case, then it wouldn't work. Because after the vinegar is baileya from the liver is vaita baileya from the vinegar. So then it's just a catch-22. You're not accomplishing anything. So what then is the point? The point is, Rashi says, that by boiling it in hot water or vinegar, it seals off the liver. And it doesn't allow the liver to be maflit anymore. In other words, the liver can never be kasher. You're not getting all the dam out of the liver. It's not happening. But there is something you could do that can change it from a halachic standpoint. And that is you could seal off the liver to the point where it's not going to be nice and tam anymore. Wow, that's an unbelievable chiddush. Usually, tam ke'ikr, da'iraisa, d'rabban, there's a whole concept of Issa Heter and Taruvas. But there's actually something you can do that seals off the liver, that doesn't allow the liver to be maflit. So you can take the liver, which has dam, you can cook it with 100 foods, it doesn't matter. It's never going to be maflit. How do you do that? By cooking it first, by boiling it either in hot water, in roischin, or together with vinegar. Lamaisa, as it relates to that story that happened with Yanai Breder Ravami and Yehuda Breder Rav Shimon Pazi, what happened there was it was boiled first perhaps, and if it was boiled first in vinegar and hot water, it's for that reason it was okay to cook it with something else, but it could be ordinarily, it would not be okay. So as it relates to Habaya Shailo, Sabai told Rav Safra, find that in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Safra asked Rav Zrika once, turned out it was the wrong question, then he asked him a second time. The bottom line is they had no way of finding out whether it's okay or not okay. But the Gemara continues. Rav Bar Shaba Ikl Be Rav Nachman. Rav Bar Shaba was once in Rav Nachman's house. I said like Kavda Shlika, and they brought him liver that was cooked. But we'll see in the Gemara, Shlika over here doesn't mean just cooked, it was overcooked. It was really well done. And Rav Bar Shaba didn't want to eat it. So they told Rav Nachman, Barbe Rav de Lagablo Yochel. You know this yid who's sitting at your table, you know, he doesn't want to, he's big machmer. He doesn't want to eat the food, Rav Nachman, that you served him. Umanoi, who's that person? Rav Bar Shaba. Rav Nachman said, Gamu l'Shaba. I want you to force Rav Shaba to eat this food, meaning he has to eat it. So the Gemara Kitanoi, this meaning of Rav Bar Shaba, that he didn't want to eat the liver that was overcooked, is really machlokes Tana. Now just to be clear, in this case, it doesn't say that the liver was cooked with other food, and even if it was, we're not discussing eating the other food. We're discussing the liver. There's also no mention of boiling it first with vinegar or with hot water. So it sounds like this is just a good old-fashioned case where somebody, Rav Nachman in this case, prepared liver by cooking it. I mean, up until this point, there was no one who said at all that maybe that would be a shayla. Abaya said it was a double pashit, right? Rav Safra thought that was Abaya's shayla, and Rav Zrika told him, I used to serve it to Rav Ami, and then Abaya said it was pashit, and then we found that it's even a Mishnah Masechtas Trumas. So there's no shayla that you're allowed to cook liver. It was never a shayla. Why isn't it a shayla? Why don't you say you can't kasher, and then when you cook it, the dam goes out, and then you're going to be by leia, because it's so torrid being maflit, it's never going to be, that was never a shayla. Stating that, you have a Rav Bar Shaba who didn't want to eat liver. The teretz is over here it was overcooked. I mean that it's overcooked, it's a little different, and that's this machlokes tanaim that the Gemara is going to mention. Rabbi Eliezer Omer in a brayso, hakaved oiseres ve'ein neseres mipnei peletes ve'ein belas. Hakaved you're allowed to eat, but at the same time it answers other food. That's essentially the Mishnah Masechtas Trumas. Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika Omer. Rabbi Shmuel the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika said two caveats. Number one, mitu veles oiseres v'neseres. If the liver is spiced, there it's different. If the liver is spiced, it could become aser, because once it's spiced, there it already has the ability to be baileya. So liver that's not softened via the spices, that won't be baileya. But if you soften it by spicing it, then it could be baileya. And finally, what we need, shluka iseres v'neseres. And if you overcook it, it softens it up as well. And at that point, it could be baileya as well. Bottom line is, you see that liver, once you overcook it, at that point, it's already a little different, being that it's a little different. So there's a tzad to be machmer, not even to eat liver by itself. Apparently, Rav Bar Shaba held like Rabbi Shmuel ben Yoshua ben Yochanan ben Breika, Rav Nachman, who served it, and Rav Nachman, who told his chevra, no, tell Rav Bar Shaba, force it, make him eat it. He held like Rabbi Eliezer. So again, when we discuss the halachas of liver, so you're cooking it by yourself, you're cooking it with other foods, and that is another thing you have to take into consideration. The liver itself, is it overcooked or is it just cooked? Is it spiced or is it not spiced? But says the Gemara, there's one more consideration when preparing liver. That is Rav Bar Rav Huna Iklalevei Rabba Bar Rav Nachman. I see the Kamei Tlas Sove Tachos. Rabba Bar Rav Huna once came to Rabbi Nachman's house and they came out and they brought him 3 sa of bread, Rashi says, that was smeared with oil and honey. Amalahu. So Rabbi Rav Huna was taken aback. Wow. He said, Mi havi yodisu dasina. You knew I was coming to prepare such a lavish meal for me? Amruleh, so they told him, Mi adif tochlon minod chsiv karasel l'Shabbos hayne get Shabbos. So it's karasel l'Shabbos hayne. Nothing to do with you. It's because of Shabbos. Adahachi. So he sits down. This is a Shabbos sudas. What do you have at your Shabbos suda? You have liver, right? So ashkechahu kav the dabe beis puna the bli adama. So you saw liver, and in the liver there was an artery that you were able to see, and it was filled with blood. Amalahu. So Rabbi Rav Huna said, Amayav disu hachi. How are you serving this? Now, this wasn't just the dam of the liver. This is the dam in an artery, in this simpine that's inside the liver. Amrulei lehechinab. What are we supposed to do? Is there a way to even remove it? Amrulei, yeah, there is a way to do it. What you have to do is karu. You're supposed to tear it shesi ve'erev. So you're supposed to tear it in that form, and you're supposed to make the hole underneath it, and as you roast it, all the dam of that simpoin is supposed to go out. Says the Gemara, the only time you have to remove the simpoin, the artery, is when you're preparing liver, avol tachlo, but if you're preparing the spleen of the animal, even though it also has an artery or it has this reddish color, shum the ba'alma, you don't have to worry about it, it's not considered blood, it's just fat, that you can disregard. It's the simpoin of the liver that you were concerned about, but there's a similar equivalent thereof simpoin in the trial that you don't have to worry about. Shmuel on a day that he would bloodlet, so he would eat. The Gemara talks about you should eat meat on a day that you bloodlet because you get weakened as you give blood. So you should get a little bit stronger. So Shmuel, he would eat a tafshil made of trial, and he disregarded that simpoin. The bottom line is, you see from this last Gemara is another thing you have to take into consideration when you're preparing liver, and that is this simpoin, this artery that has blood in it. This you for sure can't kasher, and this you can't even cook, and you can follow everything up until that point, and that's still going to be an issue. What you have to do is what Rabbi Rav Huna said. You have to tear it open, shasi ve'erev, and you have to make it pour out. The bottom line is that we had a sugi over here with regards to liver. The liver is unique because the liver is ikra dam, says Rashi. It filters the body's blood, and as a result, there's so much blood going through it. It's saturated in dam. You can't just salt it or roast it, the kasher it in a way where all the dam is going to go out. And as a result, it poses a challenge in halacha, stating that we saw chidusha. To eat the liver raw is for sure not a problem, because you could eat all meat raw without kashering. So there's no reason she'll be able to eat the liver raw. As it relates to cooking the liver by itself, so if you're going to cook it, just a basic cooking, you're not going to overspice it or anything like that, it's for sure going to be okay as well. Why aren't you worried that the liver is going to be maflit the dam? Now the dam becomes isser dam, isser kares. Then it's going to be baileya, because I did the tarit lahaflit. We're not worried about you being baileya. It's such a strong svara that in the course of the Gemara, Abaye even entertained that sad. In his maybe understanding in a Mishnah in the 10th paragraph of Masechtas Truma is that you can cook liver with non-kosher food. You have nothing to worry about. What do you mean? How can you cook liver with non-kosher food? It's being baileid or not? No, it's not. Because it's so busy being maflitan that in halacha you don't have to be worried that it's going to be baileya from the non-kosher food. But as it relates to cooking the liver on its own, so the pashtus is it's not going to be an issue. If, however, you're going to spice the food, or if you're going to overcook it, that was already machlokes tanam. That was a machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yishmael ben Yoshua ben Yochanan ben Breika. It was also machlokes Ameiram. Rav Nachman paskind like Rabbi Eliezer, and Rav Bar Shaba, this Yid who was by Rav Nachman's table, who seemed to paskin like Rabbi Shmuel ben Yoshua ben Yochanan ben Breika. As it relates to cooking liver with other foods, so that's a lot trickier. That was Abaye Shaila. Abaye told Rav Safra, try to find out for me when you go to Eretz Yisrael. He spoke to Rav Zrika, and Mamaisa, the Gemara was machriyat. The Gemara had no way really of verifying whether that's okay or it's not okay. What's the shaila there? There the shaila is different. There the shaila is, are you even worried worried in the first place about the dam of the liver. Being that the liver is ikra dam, so what is a chumrah at first glance may actually be a kula. Because the Torah said you're allowed to eat the liver, so maybe the dam of the liver is somehow treated differently. Like Yalta told Rav Nachman, Asalon dama, sharon la kavda. It could be the dam of the liver maybe is okay. So even if you cook it with other foods that for sure are being boileya, the dam that left the liver, it's still going to be fine. And then finally what the Gemara said is that you have to make sure that this simpoin gets torn out where the blood of it does, because otherwise you're going to have problems. For that reason, that this is beyond the scope of what we do, but when it comes to preparing liver, there's a special kashering process of liver, and the kashering process of liver involves boiling the liver and water, as the Gemara said, that once you boil it, or once you boil it in vinegar, at that point you seal off the liver, and that seems to be the way around this whole issue, and this is some of what's done in the preparation of liver. It's complex, you can look it up, but either way, Zok the Gemara weiter. Says the Gemara, so in the olden days, ovens were very different than the ovens that we have today. The primary difference was that the whole of the oven, the opening, the entrance of the oven was on top. It wasn't on bottom. And the way people used to cook, so you have this in Masechtas Pesachim, when they used to roast the korban Pesach, you take a spit, like a kebab, and you would put the meat that you were roasting on it, you'd bend it upside down into the oven, and that's the way people would roast their foods. It says the Gemara, if somebody's roasting, he's cooking liver and meat, and he has them both on a spit. So the halacha is like this: if the liver is going to be ilavi basra on top of the meat, shari, it's actually mutter. Why are you worried that the dam is going to leave the liver and it's going to enter the basar? Says the Gemara, because dam mishrik sharik, because the dam, just based on its texture, it's going to slide off the basar. You have to be worried that it's going to be absorbed by the basar. Kachli lave bisra asa, a similar halacha. If somebody wants to roast the khal, the udder of the animal, on top of basar, that's going to be an issue. What's the issue with the udder? It's not dam. When you talk about liver, you're talking about that. When you talk about the khal, the issue is the chalav. My time of chalav sruchi masrich, because the chalav is going to be absorbed by the meat. So the dam won't be absorbed, but the chalav will be absorbed. Rav Dimon had it just the opposite. If you want to put the chal on top of the basar, it's mutter. My time of chalav shchuta d'Rabbanan, because the chalav of the chal, as we spoke about yesterday in the intro, is only awesome d'Rabbanan. Because chalav of a behemoth shchuta is only asim d'Rabbanan. So mean that it's only asim d'Rabbanan, we're not worried about it. Kabdi love bisra aser. But if you want to put the liver on top of the basar, that's aser. And the reason is because dam's dairaisa. In other words, you can hear that maybe the liver should be more chamer than the khal, or you can hear that the khal is more chamer than the liver. Why would the liver be more chamer than the khal? Because the liver, you're worried about dam, which is asim d'Oraisa. Khal, you're worried about chal of shchuta, which is only asim d'Rabbanan. Why would the khal be more chamer? Because it's easier for a piece of meat to absorb milk than it is for it to absorb dam. What's the halacha? Darish merem hilchos of ben kavda ben chala to say bisra shari, to put it underneath the basar mutter. Ilave bisra, but to put either the liver or the chal on top of the basar, the eved in, but the eved it's okay. But the katchila loy. Rav Ashi ikul lebei Rami bar Abba chamur. Rav Ashi went to his shver's house. So it was Rav Ashi shver. It was Rami bar Abba. Chazi lebrei the Rami bar Abba. He saw the son of Rami bar Abba, Rav Ashi Shvager, Shofit, Kavdo, Yilavi Bisra. So he had a spit, and he had liver, and he had basar, and the liver was on top of the basar, and he was roasting it in a way where l'katchila you're certainly not supposed to do it. Omar, he said, Kame Yoir, Haimi Rabbanon. Yoir is a lotion of gaiva. Emed Omer Rabbanon the Evet. L'katchila mi Yomer. L'katchila you're not supposed to do it. Says the Gemara, V'ika Beiduge. If there's a Beiduge, Bisri Lavi Kavda Nami Yasar. So what's a Beiduge? So Rashi says, Shenoisten Kli l'kabel Hashuman. They would put a keli, like a pan, on the bottom of the oven, and the point was for all the fat that drips off the meat that you're roasting should go there. Like we do today for the avazim. It's an Aramish term. It's called beidugi. They would take the fat and then you use it at your next kiddush club. But the point is they took this fat and they actually used it, right? So if you're going to roast liver together with basar, it doesn't matter what. It doesn't matter if the liver's on top or if the liver's on bottom. If there's a beidugi, it's a problem. Why is it a problem? Because even if the liver is on bottom, so it's not going into the basar, but it's going into the beiduge, and then the point is you can't roast liver with the beiduge. Doesn't matter if there's basar on top, on bottom, if there's no basar at all. It's always going to be an issue. If that's the case, you should never be able to roast meat on top of a beiduge, because why aren't you worried about the dam of the meat? I guess we're assuming that you didn't kasher the meat, and you're kashering it by roasting it. So if that's the case, why aren't you worried? So the Gemara says, dam of the bisr shachin, dam of the kavda coffee. Because the dam of regular basar, that's shachin. It goes to the bottom. It settles on the bottom of the beiduge. So what you do is you can take off the top part, you can differentiate between the fat and the dam. It's easy to remove the fat, so it's not a problem. But with the liver, it all gets mixed up. I mean that it all gets mixed up there, it's going to be an issue. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. A new topic. A shoichet shecht chulin, and he has a knife that he used to shecht. The halach is that chalif, that sakin that he uses to shecht, also lachtach by roiseach. The halach is he's not allowed to use it now to cut hot food, even meat. Why? The reason is because the makoim of the Beis Habliya, the place where the sheichet does his shechita, is considered hot. Being that it's considered hot, when he uses the knife to do the shechita, it's baileya. It's baileya dam. So there's blias of dam inside the sakin. If he's going to now go ahead and use this sakin to cut a hot piece of meat, so the blias of the sakin, which is dam, is going to now go into the hot piece of meat, and you're going to be eating a blia of dam. So it's for that reason, said Rav Nachman, the name of Shmuel, a very important halacha, that the sheichet has to make sure that he never uses his chalif, his knife, to go ahead now and cut any hot food. What about soine? What if he wants to cut cold food? So cold food, you'd think maybe it's not an issue, because cold food, where's the blia? You need some medium of heat in order for the blias to transfer. So you cook it, you roast it, or if you have heat, that's going to transfer. So it's true that when the sheichet shechted the animal, there was heat. What was the heat? It was coming out of the makam hashchita. But there's no heat now because you're cutting a cold piece of meat. So if you're cutting a cold piece of meat, l'chura, it shouldn't be a problem. Says the Gemara, Amri la, so some said boy yadacha, Amri la boy yadacha. That's for sure that the meat's going to be kosher, because now you're cutting a cold piece of meat. There's no way for the dam that's balua inside the sakin to transfer into the piece of meat. The shaila is, do you have to do adach? Do you have to wash the piece of meat? Do you say that at the end of the day that there's enough here to say that on the surface maybe there's a little bit of dam? There's definitely no dam balua. The question is on the surface. Some said hadacha, some said no hadacha. Amar Avidah Mashmol Karish Malach Babas. Another very important halacha. If someone salted, he did malicha on a piece of meat. The halacha is that plate also lecha b'reiseach. You're not allowed to eat now any hot food, even fleishig hot food. The reason is because when you salt the meat, blias of dam that were inside the meat are going to go into the ka'ara. Now, if you're going to eat a hot piece of meat on that ka'ara, the blia of dam that's in the ka'ara, that got into the ka'ara when you salted the raw piece of meat on, is now going to go into the piece of meat that you're trying to eat. So you're going to be eating blias adam. Says the Gemara, Shmuel tameh, and this is of course Shmuel shitasid. We need the first half. That Shmuel said that malicha has the ability to accomplish what sli has the ability to accomplish. And just like if you roast two foods together, there's blias and platis that are going to transfer from food A to food B. When you salt the two foods together, the same exact thing happens. Chemically, the same thing happens. And if that's the case, Shmuel Shitasai, who's the Baal Member throughout Shas, who holds that Moliach Hareo Kureiseach, he paskin that a Ka'ara Shemalach Babasar, Asalacha Bareiseach, because the Melicha caused the dam to go from the basar into the keli, and as a result, now you can't go ahead and eat anything with it. Says the Gemara, also Ravin, Rabbi Yochanan. When Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, so he reported in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that Bavel, everybody holds Maliach Harei Kureiseach because Shmuel said it. He said, I'm going to tell you what Rabbi Yochanan said. Maliach Eino Kureiseach. The Kavush Eino Kibavush. Amar Abaya, but Abaya said, how did Ravin less? So Ravin made a mistake. Now he pinked David be Rabbi Ami. How do I know that? Because there was an earthenware keli that was in the house of Rabbi Ami, the Malach Babisra, and they wrote, Rav Ami roasted, he salted basar on it, vitavre, and then afterwards he got rid of it, he destroyed it. Why did he destroy it? He destroyed it because there's no way to kasher a kli cheres, and being that he had roasted raw meat that had an iblias of dam, so yeah, there was a non-kosher, it was like a regular chazet shreif kara. What do you mean? It was kosher meat. Yeah, but there's dam, right? So because it's dam, now it has blias, so he got rid of it. So said Abai, Mechti, Rav Ami, Talmud Rabbi Yochanan Haver. Rav Ami was a Talmud Rabbi Yochanan. My time at Tavre. Why did he break it? Oh, the Shmila Miyad Rabbi Yochanan, because he held that if you salt something, blias transfer. That's Shmuel's halacha. But Rav Ami wasn't a Talmud of Shmuel. Rav Ami was a Talmud Rabbi Yochanan. So he must have heard it from Rabbi Yochanan. So because Rav Ami, Rabbi Yochanan's Talmud, was noyeg chumra in Maliach Harei Kureseach. Abaye felt that was checkmate proof that he must have heard it from Rabbi Yochanan, so much so that Ravin, who reported so much back from Eretz Yisrael in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, we rely so heavily on what Ravin says throughout Shas. Ki Ravin, Ki Rav Dimi. Right, Rav Dimi came first, Ravin came second. But all these Gemaras that we have that about Ravin, all these Gemaras we have about Ravin, Rabbi Yochanan said this we're not going to rely on. Why? Because I have a Maisa Rav, a Maisa with Rabbi Yochanan's Talmud Rav Ami. One final Gemara. So Rav Kahana, Achud, Rav Yehuda, Kamid Rav Huna. So Rav Kahana, who was Rav Yehuda's brother, was sitting in front of Rav Huna. And he said the following halacha: that if somebody salts meat on a kara, you're not allowed to eat any hot food together on that kara. Why? Because the kara now has an oblius of dam, and as we mentioned, maliach harei kureseach utsnoin shechot chay besakin. So this is not soinein. Tzoynein is a real bas of a chalav term. Tznoin is also a bas of a chalav term. Tzoynein means cold, it's not hot. Tznoin is a radish, or the modern day onion, right? So today you would say an onion. It's a dove charif. It's a hot, spicy, sharp is the right word, food. So the halach is, if somebody cuts a tznoin with a knife, mutalach le bekutach. So even though you cut it with a fleshige knife, right? That's the ikka chaser. So you took a fleshige knife and you cut a tznoin with it. So you're allowed to take the tznoin, the radish, the onion, and eat it together with kutach, which is a dairy food. So kutach was Chazal's example of a milchige food. Sometimes it's just a gvina and chalav, and sometimes it's kutach, some sort of delicacy that was a milchige delicacy. So again, somebody cuts tznoin, that's the sharp food, a radish or an onion, with a fleshige knife. So the halach is you're allowed to eat it with kutach. My timer, Amar Abaya. So Abaya said, "Hi heitera bala, hi isura bala." In other words, at first glance, these two halachas would seem to contradict each other. What were the two halachas? Again, Rav Kahana, who was Rav Yehuda's brother, sitting in front of Rav Huna. He said two halachas. First halacha is that if you salt meat on a kara, you're not allowed to take this kara now and eat hot food with it. Why not? Because we're worried that the salting process caused blias of dam to go into the kara. If there's blias of dam in the kara, how could you eat the kara with hot food now? That's halacha A. Halacha B is if you cut a radish with a fleshige knife, you're allowed to eat the radish together with kutach. You're allowed to eat it together with the milchige food. And the Gemara holds that these two halachas are a steer. Now, first of all, what's the steer? First of all, in the first case, we're dealing with heat. Right? You salted maliach harei kureseach. You want to eat it now with hot food. Who said anything about heat in the case of taking a knife and cutting a radish? But the knife was hot. The teretz is that when it comes to a knife and something sharp, such as a tznoin or an onion, it doesn't have to be hot. And the reason is because the charifus of the tznoin allows the tznoin to be by leia, despite the fact that the knife is not hot. So at the end of the day, the Gemara holds that this tznoin now has in it blias of fleshiks. So if it has in it blias of fleshiks, so why are you allowed to eat it with milchiks? If you're not allowed to use the ka'ara that has blias of dam with food, then why are you allowed to eat the tznoin that has blias of fleshiks together with milchiks? That's the Gemara's kasha. So that's essentially what the Gemara means when it says my time. Amar Abayis, I'll tell you the difference. No, it's very different. Because the plate has in it something bechefza, not kosher, dam. Whereas the tznoin doesn't have anything not kosher in it. What the tznoin has inside of it is milchiks. Or fleshiks. Fleshiks is kosher. The problem is eating it with milchiks. But at the end of the day, it wasn't by leia or davaras. Amalei Rava. So Rava told Abaye, Kibola hetera may have. Who cares that the fleshiks is bechefza okay? Soif. At the end of the day, how you tired also the isuru, the isur kachal. You're right. If you want to eat the tznoin, then Abaye is saying a good svara. It wasn't by leia davarasa. But you want to eat it together with milchiks. So once you can eat it together with milchiks, so now the blia is being mitzdarif to a davarasa. So who cares that the dam is be'etzem aser, whereas the meat is not be'etzem aser? That would be a svara if you were going to eat the tznoin on its own. But you're not. You plan on eating it together with dairy. Once you eat it together with dairy, now already there is isser over here, because now already you're getting involved in bas. Rava said, I'll tell you what the Amiram meant. They meant to say, I efshalim mitame, the haylo yefshalim mitame. As it relates to the ka'ara, where you salted meat, there, the ka'ara, there's no way out. You have to get rid of the ka'ara. There's no way to eat hot food on it. Why not? The reason you can't eat hot food on it is because we're concerned that there may be a belia of dam inside, and there's no way to taste it. Right? There's no way to make an experiment in your kitchen to see whether it in fact has belias of dam, because who's going to taste it? You can't give it to a Jew to taste, because if there's dam, he's not allowed to eat it. As opposed to the radish, there's a way out. You can give it to any Haimish Yid and tell me, do you taste basar? If you taste basar, then I won't eat it together with chalav. I won't eat it with my kutach. If I don't taste basar, then I will be able to eat it with kutach. So Rava said that he didn't mean to say that in the case of the tznoid, it's mutter. He meant to say mutter. There's a way to find out if it's mutter. Amali Rapapa the Rava. Rapapa told Rava, it's not a good answer, because even in the first case, even in the case where the kar was balei adam, it's true, a yid can't taste it. You can give it to a guy to taste it. We had that right in the very beginning of the sugis of taruvas. There's something called a kfeila, right? You give it to a nachtoim who's an armar. According to Rashi, do a masich tefituma. According to Tosfos, just the opposite. You let him know that we're lying. You find a master chef. But the point is that there's why can't you give it to a non-Jew to taste? So there's no difference then between the first case and the second case. In both cases, you can do a tasting first. And that difference is if you can do it with a yid or not a yid. And Rav Papa backed it up. He said, didn't we learn in the Mishnah? If you have a pot that you use to cook flesheks, you can't cook milk. It's been bishul b'nais and tam. And if you did, shisha. But bishul b'truma, if you cook truma le'vash b'chulin, then bishul b'nais and tam. But minon bishul and truma tam l'koyin. Bishul when it comes to truma, I understand what nais and tam means. Literally, have somebody taste it. Give it to a koyin who can eat the truma. So I haven't tasted. What was the answer when we looked at sugya the first time? The tamik kfela. You give it to a kfela to taste. So achinami the tamik kfela. Here too, give it to a kfela to taste. So Rav, if you're going to tell me the difference between the reisha and the seif and the two cases that Rav discusses, in one case you can taste it, the other case you can. It's not true. In both cases you can taste it. In the reisha, it's true you need any Yehudi to taste it. In the seif you can have a yid taste it. But either way, any Yehudi can taste it. Rav said, "Hachinami ki kaminad like the kfela." You're right. That's talking about where there was no kfela, there was no any Yehudi to taste it. I mean that there was no any Yehudi to taste it. That's what he meant to say. In that case, it's going to be awesome. Whereas in the seifa, you're always going to have someone to taste it. Any yid is never to taste it. In the reisha, you have to find a kfela arma. You have to do masich vituma. You're going to Tosfos, he has to be a professional. You may not find somebody. So over there, if you have a ka'ara where you salted meat on it, so there the halach is aser. Is it really aser? No. There's really a way out. The way out is give it to a kfela arma, taste it, find out if it's nice and tam. But it's not always so simple. So therefore, the Amiram said aser. They meant to say that chances are it's going to be aser. Whereas in the seifa, it could be it's good. So aser doesn't really mean aser, mutter doesn't really mean mutter. Right? Pasha, it sounds like aser means aser, mutter means mutter. No, aser means you have to find the kfela arma. If you can't, it's going to be aser. Mutter means find the yid, tell him to taste it, and if he doesn't taste the basa, then it's mutter lecha b'kutach. So principally, there really is no difference between a plate where you salted raw meat that has an ablias of dam, or a radish that you cut with a fleishik knife that has an ablias basa, as it relates to eating together with chalav. Aser mutter is more just a question of semantics, what aser meant and what mutter, and that was all in Rava's Pshat. Abaye saw some fundamental difference. He saw a real difference. He saw a difference that, no, one case you were Baileya Isser, and the other case you were Baileya Heter. Now really, the svaras of Baileya Isser and Baileya Heter, they feature prominently in the sugis of Chanan. When you're doing the sugis of Chaticha Nas and Avelos, if something's Baileya, Cheftz of Isser, you have Chanan. If it was Baileya Heter, then all you have is the Bliya. What's the Chanan? A radish that has in it a Bliya Basa, there's no Chanan on the radish because it has Basa. Chanan that it's fleishiks. Chanan is a halach in Isser. Chaticha atzma nas and avela, where there's a bli of Isser. So if there's a bli of dam, there's a Chanan. But l'chura, what does Chanan have to do with anything? Now in tomorrow's daf, when we learn the sugi of not bar not, their Chanan is gonna play an important role. Either way, we'll stop here.